presenting today is a part of my dissertation. I'm working on immigrants' representation in Germany, France, and the UK. And what excites me here is how immigrants are represented in parliament and what is the role of parties in this. Following the assumption of Sartori, who says that parties have an expressive function, we would assume that those policy positions that are not represented by the party, they won't be represented probably in parliament. It's the same that Pinkin would say, that these ideas that are not advanced by these very important and crucial political actors won't be represented in parliament. So the idea here is to see what parties indeed are doing related to immigrants. Compared to most of the research related to immigration and parties, what I'm focusing here is on multiculturalism. So most of the previous research focuses on parties' position on immigration, which means focusing on whether parties want to allow more immigrants to come or they want to restrict and have stricter border control. In contrast to that, multiculturalism emphasizes whether parties would support the creation of more policies to help immigrants to integrate to the host society. So it's not about border control, it's about how do we manage the immigrants that are living here and whether we help them to integrate. So for doing that, I will be focusing today on party systems in Western European countries. I've selected this geographical area because these countries have been democratic for an extended period of time. They are immigration countries and also they are members of the European Union, which makes that in many regards these countries have organized common immigration policies, and they also allow European citizens to cross the borders and live in the other countries. So the questions I will be investigating today is whether parties are promoting more multiculturalism to help immigrants to integrate to society while maintaining their individual and cultural distinction, or whether they are more striving for assimilation and asking immigrants to integrate to the national culture. And finally, what would be the causes for this? Why would parties position themselves in one extreme or in the other, or in between? So the theory is based on literature on political competition, which says that parties compete and therefore they will approach or they will be closer together, or they will take distance from their opponents. And also the idea that political competition is dynamic. So some issues will be important in some elections, but they won't be in other elections. So the importance of that issue can also vary. Finally, from the perspective of issue competition theory, we would expect that parties would emphasize those issues in which they feel that they have a competitive advantage. And on this, McGill has argued that the emergence of far-right parties would make that parties mainstream parties and other niche parties would adopt different strategies, and they will either come closer to the far-right parties and become more restrictive on immigration stances, or they will oppose that, or they could also ignore it. But Roberto believed this logic, von Spagni would argue that it is the electoral success of the far-right party that is in the end affecting the position of parties. So I will be testing this last hypothesis. But first of all, let's discuss a little bit the conceptualization. So as I told you, previous studies have emphasized the immigration position of parties. So by immigration, meaning here these policies related to admitting new immigrants to the country. Whereas what I'm focusing on now is integration. Those state policies that are adopted to favor or help immigrants to integrate to the host society, and these include citizenship regime, integration and anti-discrimination policies, etc. From this perspective, integration policies equals multicultural policies, and this is defended and defined in the same way by scholars working on multiculturalism. What is interesting is that not always parties' position on immigration and integration come together. And this is has been shown, for instance, by Money in 1999, saying that parties would converge on their positions on immigration policies, but they will have different positions on integration policies. So, following this idea, if we follow what most of the research has done, they have focused on the x-axis, right? On immigration control. Looking at whether parties are more on a position, a more flexible or restrictive position on immigration. So we will find a party located, let's say, more restricted, right? Following the logic that these two would be connected, we would expect that the party would be more pro-assimilation, not helping immigrants at all to integrate to society. So if we have two dimensions, the party would be located here. But what happens is that some parties that are pro-integration, they will also be restrictive, and they will say, okay, we're going to help immigrants to integrate, but for that we want to control border control. We want to control the borders. We don't want everyone to come here and we help everyone. We help those that we help, but we control our borders. And also following this logic, we can also have parties that will say, we don't help them at all, but we need them for our job market, for instance, so we are going to make immigration control more flexible. But we want the immigrants to come here, we help them, we don't help them to integrate, but they are allowed to come to the country. So this is the logic I'm following, right? The main hypotheses I will be testing are two. The first one is that the more electoral success far-right parties have, the more other parties will shift to more restrictive positions, right? So this is what we see in the x-axis, the electoral success, and on the y-axis, the party position, and they will have will follow this trend. Also, the second hypothesis is that as the salience of the issue will increase, the position of parties will be more restrictive. So this is my second hypothesis. And in this paper, I also explore what other alternative explanations for these positions will be. And the literature refers, the economic literature refers to the economy and the situation of the economy. So GDP growth being one factor and the other one unemployment. Following this logic, we would expect that when the economy is doing well, parties are less restrictive. So GDP growth would mean parties being less restrictive, and unemployment rates increasing would mean parties being more restrictive, right? There is another core of literature saying that the population feels threatened by the size of the immigrant population. So if there are more immigrants, we would expect that parties would be a little more restrictive on their positions on integration issues. And finally, I want to bring this other variable, which is the institutional one. From this perspective, we would expect that parties that have already adopted a lot of laws in order to protect immigrants, they have already achieved some political agreement on how to treat immigrants. So these parties will be parties in these countries, they will be less restrictive because they have already advanced a lot more, and then they are already helping immigrants to integrate. So the data I'm using is the Chapel Hill expert survey, and I'm using this expert survey because they include two different items for immigration. So one question is asking the position of parties on immigration, and the other question, the one I'm using here, is the position on integration. And whether parties favor multiculturalism or they rather favor assimilation. Regarding the independent variables, I look at the salience of the integration issue, the share of votes that radical parties have, and some OECD statistics related to the demographic data and the GDP growth and unemployment. Finally, I made use of the Multicultural Policy Index developed by Banding et al., and that they measure the quantity, the amount of multicultural laws that have been adopted in most Western countries, and then we see very important variations. So, regarding measurement, so the first dependent variable is the mean party system position change between 2006 and 2010. So, what I'm looking at here is whether parties became more restrictive between 2006 and 2010 as a consequence of the electoral success of radical right parties. And the second dependent variable is party system mean position in 2010. So some preliminary results. So what we observe here is the mean position of parties across party systems on multicultural issues. And what we observe, the black line, sorry, we are missing here a part of the curve, but the black line indicates 2010, the gray line is 2006. So what we see is that parties overall are becoming more pro-multicultural across Western European party systems. And also we see great variation in European countries. So Austria, France, Flemish, Belgium being quite extreme, and then having Sweden, Belgium, Portugal being here more pro-multicultural. From the perspective of the salience of the issue, we also see some variation, and we see that compared to 2006, the issue is less salient. So we observe also that Austria, Greece, Denmark, on the one hand, are discussing more this issue, and it's being more important in political competition compared to Ireland, Portugal, or Sweden on the other hand. So let's go to some preliminary results. This paper is developing, so please, your comments are very welcome. But what we see here, when we test for the bivariate analysis between radical right parties' electoral success and the position of parties, is that these are highly correlated. So the more radical right parties, or the better they do during the election, the more restrictive parties become on this issue, right? The second relation looks at the salience and the parties' position, and we also see that more salience shows that the parties are more restrictive on this policy issue, right? Finally, checking out the alternative explanations, we observe that the economy is not important. So GDP growth and unemployment doesn't make a real difference, although my end is very small and the time period covers as well. But these are the trends that we observe. Not the share of immigrants. Share of immigrants is not being important, but the multicultural laws that have been adopted before seem to play a crucial role on whether parties will be more restrictive or not. So this needs further examination. So in order to conclude, I have 3 main points that here appear like 1, 1, and 2. But the first point is that the distinction between immigration and integration is very important and crucial for the studies of immigration and the impact on representation, political competition, and voting behavior. The second one is that there are some patterns across Western European party systems that parties are becoming a little bit more pro-multicultural, at least from 2006 to 2010, that the salience of the issue has also decreased. The electoral success of far-right parties has a great impact on parties' position on this issue. And finally, GDP growth, unemployment, and the size of the immigrant population doesn't seem to play an important role. And finally, the number of multicultural laws adopted has to be further researched, and I think it's important to take into consideration what has been done before in order to understand political competition on this issue. So the next step is to expand the study to more cases or move to the party level and include the formal one. Okay, thank you very much for